She was articulate, highly educated, bilingual, and passionately committed to the LGBT community. My dear soul sister, Cheryl Spector, was the most loving, inappropriate person I knew. And I loved her. She left us way too soon in 2007 from acute myeloid leukemia. It was a fast-acting illness, being diagnosed in June and taking her in September. Two of my friends here tonight, Shuri Asbill and Dave Adagali, were part of her caretaking team that summer, so thank you for being here. I first met Cheryl in the summer of 1984, after my college education, so that's how old I am. She was dancing on top of a booth at a Sunday night drag show at the other side in DC. Of course. I was mesmerized by her happy energy and glowing personality. Cheryl and I were both from New Jersey, and we immediately hit it off. We began dating in 1985 and maintained a long-distance relationship since I had to move back to Jersey for a short time. We were together for a year and a half, and it was an exciting time as I experienced DC, Baltimore, and New York pride, and started to come into my own as a lesbian. Cheryl came from a Jewish family with an incredible humor, and she could let her joke roll off her tongue like magic. During that time, Cheryl's brother Stan contracted AIDS and eventually took his life in 1985. Stan was about to graduate from medical school. His loss left a huge hole in her life as she watched more friends succumb to the disease. Cheryl's activism was born. She volunteered for the March on Washington in 1987 and 1993 and was the Grand Marshal for Gay Pride in 1998. She co-founded the group Oppression Under Target in the late 80s. It was a group that distributed safe-sex kits to women, and Cheryl always had her dental dams on hand, passing them out wherever we went. She felt that the more kids she passed out, maybe she could save one more life. Cheryl worked for ACT UP to prevent the spread of HIV through infected drug needles. She worked for Queer Nation, the Lesbian Avengers, Radical Fairies, Arlington Gay and Lesbian Alliance, Capital Pride, and the Mountain Project, to name a few. And she was a popular drag king when she wasn't out changing the world. She would call me to tell me the name of the new group she joined, knowing my reaction would be, what in the heck is a lesbian avenger? I was more conservative 20 years ago. Her response would be, lighten up, honey, and try it. Cheryl served on the board of the Rainbow History Project and chronicled years of DC LGBT history with her video camera. It was attached to her like an appendage. Cheryl wanted to capture every memory and always had pictures to share of those moments. Our core group of friends, consisting of about 8 women, were our extended family celebrating special occasions, experiencing emailing for the first time, and our camping escapades where Cheryl would proudly take off her shirt to show her leather harness, as she would pull from her bag her leather Barbie and Ken. Who knew? Never a dull moment when Cheryl was around. Right, Glenda?
Absolutely.
If anyone ever followed the DC radio station of WJFK, The Don and Mike Show, a popular guest was Cheryl the Big Dyke. Yes, that was our friend Cheryl Spector. She challenged these guys to be respectful if you were going to poke at the gay community. Over the airwaves, she would tell jokes as only Cheryl could. And these guys loved her, and they grew to embrace the gay community because Cheryl was the bridge. In preparing my presentation for tonight, I found old podcasts of the Don and Mike Show. I haven't heard Cheryl's voice in almost 12 years and was taken right back to those great memories. Cheryl found her job with the CIA in 2000 through this show because an executive loved hearing her stories that when Cheryl said she was unemployed, a guy called Don and Mike to find her. At the CIA, this incredible in-your-face activist was loved and cherished. Over the years, Cheryl put on a lot of weight, and she became well-endowed on the top, unlike myself. She affectionately named her breasts Thelma and Louise. Remember I said she was inappropriate. Cheryl always had bags with her, too. So, we would be at parties, and Cheryl would get an audience around her, and she would take out a can. And she'd put it between her boobs.
Yeah.
what would emerge. As friends would howl with laughter, Cheryl would beam with joy like a bad little kid. She had no inhibitions, and I loved her for that, but don't worry, I won't be crushing cans tonight, or any night for that matter. I couldn't even put a dent in the can. Cheryl was an in-your-face, endearing activist who had a personal mission of making sure people accepted and appreciated the gay community. The more unaccepting the person was, the more determined she was to change that person's mind. She was so funny with the gift of making you laugh to tears and wet your pants, that even the straightest person in the world would laugh. She'd have a field day with Donald Trump. And I know she is working her magic from above. She's going to get his ass. She never missed an event and often attended several events in one evening to make sure she showed her support and had her voice heard. She obviously had a lot of life to live in a short time. I asked her so many times, "Why do you do so much?" And her responses were the same: "Because I have to stop what's happening to our community." And she would ask me why I wasn't out there, and my reasons were the same: because I was afraid of coming out for fear that it would hurt my company and my career. She always accepted my reason begrudgingly, but she would lovingly encourage me that it would be okay if I came out professionally. Fast forward to the summer of 2007, our last summer together, when she was in the hospital. Her room was a revolving door of visitors from the beginning of her stay. I would spend a few hours a day there, and we talked and laughed endlessly, recalling memories and listening to her jokes. And much like you, Frank, she loved Susan and said, "You got a good one, don't F it up." A cadre of visitors spanned every initial in the LGBTQ+ community. At that time, reintroducing queer was more popular, and as conversations took place, she would look over at me knowing I dreaded the word, because being called queer for me back then had me ready to cock my fist for a fight. And I kicked someone's ass, seriously. But I listened intently to the conversations. Uh-oh, is it time? And slowly, I started to understand that the word could not hurt me anymore, and that if others were feeling prideful, calling themselves queer, then it was time for me to open my mind to the word. The night before Cheryl died, the LGBT community held a candlelight vigil for her outside the hospital, singing and praying for her. It was one of the most beautiful displays of love to see the influence she had over people from every age group. Cheryl was the DC LGBT community hero, and she was my hero. Fast forward to 2012, I came upon the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. It was time to come all the way out professionally. As I took steps to put myself out there and Adnet was LGBT owned, I could feel her spirit nudging me forward. Well, probably kicking my ass for it. It was also time to be the voice to make a difference for not just the LGBT community, but for diversity as a whole. It was no longer okay that we are marginalized. It is no longer acceptable that people in power turn a blind eye to toxic workplaces and bullying. And it is no longer tolerable to be silent about gender discrimination. Our LGBT business community needs to be prospered and valued honored for the value we bring. I know in the depths of my heart I would not be standing here tonight as a leader in the LGBT community without the influence of her. I know Cheryl's memory tonight, I honor Cheryl's memory tonight, and I know that the DC LGBT community is healthier and more respected because of Cheryl's devotion to making a difference. She was fearless, she was relentless with the most loving and biggest heart I know, and I love you, Cheryl.